Welcome, everyone. Mr. Secretary, distinguished guests, veterans and their family members, caregivers, and survivors, and audience members. Thank you for joining us for today's event, VA's mission to serve all who served. We at VA are proud to hold today's program in this beautiful memorial built to celebrate the women who served in our nation's military, located on America's most sacred grounds. I am U.S. Army veteran, military retiree spouse, and VA Deputy Chief of Staff, Maureen Elias, your Master of Ceremonies for today's program. Our interpreters today are Casey Moreno and Sonette Jenkins. Over the course of the next hour, we will hear from Secretary McDonough, from a fellow woman veteran, a veteran caregiver, and a veteran survivor, all about what VA's new mission statement means to them. In doing so, we will celebrate and honor all those we serve, the almost 19 million living veterans today who have served this nation in uniform, along with their families, caregivers, and survivors. So without further ado, please rise in spirit or body as you are able for the presentation of the colors by the Joint Armed Forces Color Guard, and remain so for the singing of the National Anthem by Susan Carter, Director of VA Media Relations.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we hailed, o'er the last gleaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Coat, right shoulder, forward. Ready, step.
Thank you, Color Guard and Ms. Carter. Please remain standing for the invocation given by Chaplain Kimberly R. Willis, Executive Director of Chaplain Service for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs.
Good afternoon. Join me in prayer commensurate with your tradition. Eternal and gracious God, thank you for this moment, a moment of deep reflection and celebration, where we come together in community in these hallowed halls of the Women's Military Memorial to honor women and their great contributions to humanity and more specifically to this nation, both in times of peace and times of war. Women who have sacrificed all for this sovereign nation, even when their efforts were not welcome, for no other reason than their gender. Today, we commend those whose dedication to country preceded this day and have paved the way for all women who have worn the uniform or committed their actions to the cause of this nation. Women such as Margaret Corbin, Harriet Tubman, Oprah May, Loretta Walsh, Myrtle Hazard, Esther McGowan Blake, Deborah Sampson, Genevieve and Lucille Baker, and the countless women who followed them in the call to service. Women who determined that their gender would not limit their service or sacrifices for this nation, and who, with determination rooted in justice and righteousness, demanded opportunities in all military career fields, to include official recognition and combat roles. In this moment of history, oh God, we are so grateful that we can hear their stories, understand how we have all benefited from their stories, share their stories, and honor their stories by continuing to press toward the mark of the high calling of equity of treatment during and post-military service for themselves, their families, their caregivers, and their survivors. God, continue to equip our leaders with wisdom and seating them in the urgency of now, to always choose to do what is right and to do what is just. Bless this gathering and let it be a guide for our future stories. Amen.
Please be seated. It is now my distinct privilege to invite U.S. Air Force veteran Lourdes Tiglau, Director of the VA Center for Women Veterans, up to the stage.
Good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Honorable Denis McDonough. Before coming to VA, he served as the 26th White House Chief of Staff and as Principal Deputy National Security Advisor. He believes deeply, as he testified to Congress, that there is no more sacred obligation nor noble undertaking than to uphold our promises to our veterans, whether they came home decades ago or days ago. Please join me in welcoming the 11th Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Denis McDonough.
Lourdes, thank you for that kind introduction. More importantly, thank you for your years of distinguished service, which continues now with your invaluable leadership of the Center for Women Veterans. Many of Lourdes' team and our teammates from the Center for Minority Vets are here in the audience. My thanks to each of you. You and your work are critical to VA's ability to deliver outcomes for all the vets we serve. Chief Wilson, thank you for your service in uniform, your stewardship of this amazing memorial. We deeply value every opportunity we get to work with you. West Point was founded on March 16th, 1802, 221 years ago today. Sue Fulton represents West Point's trailblazing class of 1980, the first to graduate women. Sue, thank you for challenging me and each of us every day to do better for all vets and for leading the charge for today's important events. Lieutenant General retired Gina Grosso, thank you for all you do to help us add to the finest workforce in the federal government as our Chief Human Resource Officer. And my thanks to Maureen, whose service and voice inside VA every day on behalf of veterans. Each of those attributes make her a fitting, very fitting MC for today. The theme of this year's Women's History Month is celebrating women who tell our stories. Power of words and the stories those words tell is my focus today. As we communicated yesterday with over 13 million veterans and family members on our veteran resource mailing list, exactly 20 years ago, we were in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. Military buildup in the Persian Gulf had been underway for some time, with hundreds of thousands of American and coalition troops deployed to Kuwait. A Marine Corps company commander named Mary Beth Antonelli was among their ranks. The daughter of Peace Corps volunteers and school teachers, Mary Beth was born into service. That led her to the Naval Academy and to join the Marine Corps after graduation, to the great benefit of the United States national interest. Not surprisingly, to those who know her and who know the Corps, she excelled in each phase of her Marine Corps career. But that week, 20 years ago, she was devastated to learn that after years of preparing for that moment, her time at Annapolis, at the basic school, years training with her unit of combat engineers, devastated to learn that she would not be allowed to lead her Marines into battle because she's a woman. Also unsurprising to those who know her, Mary Beth raised hell with her chain of command. These were her Marines. This was her unit. She knew, and so did her unit, that no one was more prepared to lead them than she was. Her commanding officer knew that too. In the fog of war, he said, no one would care that she is a woman, because patriotism and courage are not constrained by gender. The only thing that would matter, the only thing, was whether she was a good leader. And Mary Beth is a great leader. So she led her Marines as they crossed the border into Iraq, among the first troops to enter the country at the start of the Iraq War. They did their job. They did it well. And they returned home safely a few months later. Now, I'll come back to the end of that story in a minute. But I'm telling the story not because it's extraordinary, although Mary Beth certainly is. I tell this story because it's not unique. Mary Beth's experience is shared by so many women veterans through our country's history, going back to the Revolutionary War. Women comprise the fastest growing cohort of veterans, with over 2 million women having bravely served our country in uniform to this day. On this ground, At this memorial, we're surrounded by thousands of examples of women taking risks, facing down adversity, and fighting battles, in and out of uniform, for a stronger America, for equality, opportunity, inclusion, a brighter and better future for all Americans. Too many of those fights continue to this day, especially for women of color, particularly Black and Native women vets, whose immense contributions are too often overlooked. And VA is not immune. The stories surrounding us at this memorial are shared by so many women veterans in today's audience. Women vets who serve their country honorably and admirably, but may not have felt welcomed as they walked through the doors of VA. Maybe they're catcalled, asked if they're there to pick up their dad or with their husband, or exposed to other forms of sexism and misogyny. Many of you have shared similar, inexcusable experiences. So I can understand why you might not have seen yourselves and your service and your sacrifice reflected in our mission statement hanging outside VA buildings around the country. Same is true for caregivers who often invest their lives and careers to care for their vet. For survivors who mourn the loss of their beloved veterans. And for non-combat vets who may wonder whether they can hold their heads as high or even call themselves veterans. So today we take a step forward. One step, and there's many, many more to go. But today we take a step toward making sure all who have served know VA is their VA. Today we're bringing our mission statement into the moment, embracing the fullest meaning of President Lincoln's sentiments, promise, and unquenchable passion, reflected in President Biden's charge to fulfill what he rightly calls our nation's one solemn obligation: to equip those we send into harm's way and to care for them when they return home. To care for every single veteran. Going forward, VA's mission statement will read, to fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for those who have served in our nation's military and for their families, their caregivers, and their survivors. The words adorning our walls at VA matter. The stories those words tell, those stories matter. We acknowledge, honor, respect, and lift up those women veterans who didn't feel like they belonged, those veterans who feel like they didn't belong or don't belong because of the incomplete stories those words told. We reach out to and welcome, invite those caregivers, survivors, anyone who has not felt welcomed at VA. You are welcome today and every day at your VA. Now, this is an important step, and as necessary as it is, it's insufficient. We have to continue improving access, delivering outcomes, and earning the trust of all those we serve. We've been taking important steps to do that, to make VA and our programs complete, offering services women veterans need by providers trained in gender-specific care in a safe, respectful, and welcoming environment. Women veterans are offered an assignment to a designated women's health primary care provider. That's for both general primary care and gender-specific primary care. We have women vet coordinators in every regional office to provide assistance specifically for women veterans so they can access the care they deserve. We have made substantive changes to the transition assistance program so women transitioning from the service are offered information relevant to their individual post-transition goals. We're committed to providing women vets the full range of health benefits they need for their health and their well-being: reproductive health, contraception, fertility services, family building, gender-specific cardiac care, and more. And we're starting to see results from these efforts. Women veterans are trusting us at higher levels now. Trust scores steadily rising from 81% in 2017 to 86% today. We still need to build far more trust with women vets, because those scores are 4 points below the average and nearly 5 points below male vet trust scores. So we still have a lot of work to do and a long journey to go. Honoring the service and sacrifice of all veterans in our words and in our deeds is an important, necessary next step on that winding road. Now back to Mary Beth. Her service did not end when she returned from Iraq. She went back to the Naval Academy to teach. It was there, back in Annapolis, that she embraced the responsibility to mentor the next generation of women vets. Such a Marine thing to do. Women whom, she says, changed her life. She said, "I pledged to myself that I would bring every ounce of myself to those midshipmen. And I knew that I would be a better Marine for it by being completely, uniquely, and wonderfully me." Today, Mary Beth Antonelli is known as Mary Beth Brueggemann. She runs a nonprofit dedicated to veterans serving again after leaving military through volunteering and community service. She's built a one-of-a-kind mentorship and leadership program for women veterans, a space for women veterans to support one another by sharing their own stories of challenge, strength, connection. Her husband, Brian, a Marine Corps Cobra pilot whom she met on the very first day of combat operations in Iraq, recently retired after an illustrious military career of his own, including 7 deployments overseas. In so many ways, Mary Beth is the quintessential American veteran. Beyond the discipline and the standards, and the duty and the sacrifice, what defines the story of American veterans, like Mary Beth, is that it's grounded in an unyielding commitment to strength and to others, a pledge to stand up and fight for our country and for our communities and our people, both in and out of uniform. So in closing, I pay tribute to the countless women veterans, those memorialized here and those sitting here, who through their service and through their words, their voice, their art, champion the cause of equality, inclusion, and strength. The The stories of women veterans and their achievements throughout our country's history are integral chapters in VA's story, just as the stories of women who work at VA and other advocates and allies who ensure all veterans receive the world-class health care and earned benefits they so richly deserve. Stories that guide us and inspire us and will do so for generations to come. It's now our job to add to those stories trust and outcomes. So thank you for sharing your stories. I shared just one of them today. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them out there, just like it. I'm honored to be joined today by others, a woman veteran, survivor, and a caregiver who will add their stories to our effort today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for propelling us on this mission. God bless you all. God bless our nation's service members, our veterans, their families, their caregivers, and their survivors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mary Tobin. Mary is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and the New York Institute of Technology. She is a proud combat veteran, having served 10 years in the United States Army as a communications officer, including 2 combat tours in Iraq. Ms. Tobin, we are so honored to have you with us here today.
"60 years ago in Nashville, Tennessee, a group of college students bravely decided to begin protesting the segregation of lunch counters in the city. Among the leaders of that student-led movement was a young woman by the name of Mary Pless, who could be seen on most days standing alone outside of one of the restaurants that denied her the right to dine there, quietly handing out flyers to passersby, asking them to join her in the fight to desegregate the restaurant, asking them to do the right thing. And although it was hard to miss Mary Pless standing there with her large, engaging smile and her passionate pleas to those walking by, she was generally met with nasty looks and comments, or most often she was simply ignored and treated as if she didn't exist. In those moments, she would later recall, she felt unseen. Mary Pless, along with 2 of her best friends in college and countless other student protesters, would later win the fight to desegregate lunch counters in Nashville, Tennessee. Mary would later go on to graduate from Vanderbilt University, earn her PhD, travel the world, become a world-class educator, and teach her 5 children that it was always the right time to do the right thing. And most importantly, she would teach them that service to others was an obligation, not simply a choice. Mary Pless gave birth to 4 sons and 1 daughter, and that daughter would later grow up to attend the United States Military Academy at West Point, become an Army officer, and serve almost 10 years in the military, including 2 combat tours to Iraq. Her daughter dreamed of becoming a 4-star general, but that dream was cut short by injuries sustained while in service to her country. Mary Pless's daughter would eventually be medically retired from the Army and would one day walk into a VA medical center right here in DC, not too far from here, to continue medical treatment for her injuries. And Mary's daughter was grateful that the country she served remained committed to her healing even after her military service was completed. But when her daughter walked into that building seeking treatment, she was greeted by a large sign embossed in gold letters that read, "To care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan." And it was in that moment and in the years to come that whenever Mary Pless's daughter would visit VA clinics and buildings all over the country and see those words, her only daughter, the one who had committed herself to a life of service to others, would also feel ignored, just like her mother had been so many years before, and ultimately, Mary's daughter felt unseen. Dr. Marielle Hicks, formerly known as Marielle Pless, is my mother. And I am that daughter that listened to her mother's charge to serve others out of obligation to humanity. I serve and continue to serve this country because it is and was still the right thing to do. Now, I did not serve the Army for awards, commendations, and accolades, so I never needed to be thanked for my service. But in the places that have committed to helping me heal from my visible and invisible wounds from war, I never expected to feel unseen. Today, during Women's History Month, here at the Military Women's Memorial, we stand in the shadows of thousands of women who have served this country, many of whom made the ultimate sacrifice. And today, I can proudly say that the Department of Veterans Affairs has done the right thing. March 18th, just 2 days from now, will mark the 1-year anniversary of my mother's death. At her funeral last year, her two best friends from college that she protested with while in Nashville, Tennessee, Ann Campbell and Ruth Moore, spoke at her funeral. And they recounted stories of how my mother bravely protested the injustices of racism, and sometimes even at the threat of death, recalling that, yes, they were inspired by her determination to do what was right, but they could not understand why they weren't allowed to eat in a restaurant with their dear friend simply because of the color of her skin. And they could not understand a society that did not see my mother. Mr. Secretary, I'm grateful for your leadership and that of your amazing team of public servants who work countless days and nights to make this historical change happen. I would also like to acknowledge the efforts of leaders and advocates throughout the years who petitioned for this change. And yes, sir, there will be naysayers. There will be people who say, why now? And what difference does this change make? Why do you need words on a wall to tell you that you're included in the VA's mission? Well, my first reply, just in case you're asking for my advice, Mr. Secretary, would be to tell the story of Lieutenant General Franklin Buster Hagenbeck, the 57th Superintendent of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Go Army! General Hagenbeck attended the funerals of two West Point women graduates, First Lieutenant Laura Walker, the first female West Point graduate killed in combat, and Second Lieutenant Emily J.T. Perez, the first black female officer in U.S. history to be killed in combat. And you should know that during West Point ceremonies, specifically funerals, it is a very sobering moment when the alma mater is sung in honor of the fallen soldier. It is important to note that in the lyrics for the alma mater were the words, "Guide us, thy sons aright," in tribute to the falling soldier. Well, the superintendent left both of those funerals with this overarching feeling that preserving the words for the sake of tradition disrespects the West Point women who serve. So he decided to change the words in the face of some pretty tough opposition, particularly older West Point graduates. And he stated, changing one word in the alma mater does not destroy our traditions, and that it is simply the right thing to do. It must be noted that changing that one word, son, to own, now allows me and my West Point sisters in this room right now to honor my classmate, class of 2003, Laura, and my dear friend and little sister, Emily, every time I now sing that alma mater. And now I am sure that the academy that I love recognizes their eternal sacrifices to this country. Listen, words matter, written or spoken, and they are sometimes the difference between recognizing selfless service of all Americans or staying true to outdated traditions that exclude the sacrificial service of so many. It was written words like "no colors allowed" and "whites only" that kept my mother from eating lunch with her best friends in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was spoken words from Dr. King that encouraged students like my mother to continue her fight, which eventually became a reality. And it was the spoken words of my late mother that set me on a path to service to others. And it was the written words of Congressman John Lewis in his congressional nomination that sent me to West Point and set me on a path of service to this country. And today, Mr. Secretary and everyone seated here, it is in the words reflected in the new motto, the new vision, that all those who have served and sacrificed for this country can finally be seen. And finally, to all those who have served in our nation's military and for their families, caregivers, and survivors, the VA see you, we see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. What an inspiration your mother's determination to do what's right continues to be. I would now like to introduce Dr. Patricia Ochan. When her husband, a Marine with 3 combat tours to Iraq and Afghanistan, was injured, she set aside her career to care for him. As she navigated the new role of caregiver, she realized the invisibility of this population and lack of knowledge on their unique needs. She has become a spokesperson for the caregiver community. Please help me welcome Dr. Ochan.
Thank you, Maureen, for those kind words. Honorable Secretary, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to stand before you today. Thanks for inviting me to stand before you at such a special and historic day. Thank you for your service. Oftentimes, I have been surprised to hear the words, "Thank you for your service," from fellow Americans. Not only am I humbled, but I really do appreciate that someone is kind enough to think that I deserve a thank you. My husband, a Marine, did 3 tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. The day I learned of his injuries, I felt the pain as well. I went into crisis and panic mode. I left the job that I loved, and I became a caregiver on spot with no training and no warning. I'll never forget the words his doctor said to me during our first doctor appointment. "Well, Pat, you are now part of the healthcare team." As confusing as this sounded at the time, those words got me thinking ever since. I realized that my role had quickly changed, and I was expected to start making very serious decisions about someone else's life. At the same time, those words made me feel that my opinion was so important to the doctors. There was a level of trust built. And the best part about this whole communication with the doctor was that I watched my husband slowly by slowly gain his confidence back. I could feel that he felt he had the best team rooting for him. And you know what? He fought so hard to recover because he knew I was there, and he knew the doctors welcomed me to be part of the team. To me, the words from the doctor were the beginning of the healing process for my family. Today will go down in history as a very special day because the VA's new mission statement to fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for those who have served in our nation's military and for their families, caregivers, and survivors. This is a very loud and clear thank you for your service. It will impact and it will be felt deeply by so many caregivers who have felt unseen for so long. You know, our warriors' injuries and challenges that come with it may never go away. But today, you, the VA, have made such a difference by hearing our voice. You are telling us clearly that you are invested in our well-being as caregivers. To the young people, like my son William, who is here today, young people who are caregiving in households all across America and taking in the stress and responsibility, leading to all sorts of health challenges at an early stage, will feel reassured. This change means a lot to us as caregivers. It is a clear indication that the VA will stop at nothing to see that our family's overall health improves. It is also a clear indication that the VA is finally opening the door for timely access to resources. We finally feel seen. We finally feel appreciated for the incredible service we have silently offered to our veterans. So today, to all my fellow caregivers, America has heard our voice. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you to your son, William, for your service. We see you. Who is cutting onions? Whew. Okay, sorry. And thank you to your husband for his service. Next, we have Charles McCaffrey, a Navy veteran with over 35 years of military, government contracting, and small business experience. He is also a serial entrepreneur, instructor, mentor, and ardent supporter of the military community, and a gifted storyteller. Mr. McCaffrey.
Mr. Secretary, guests, thank you so much for this opportunity to tell my story today. I noticed Brent as soon as I walked into the art gallery, because that's where you expect to find a Marine that you're going to date for the next 3.5 years, an art gallery. We just kind of became a couple. When he wasn't in class or in the field training, Brett was at my place, our place. I cleared out space in the spare closet, and it was soon filled with his uniforms and civilian clothes. We built a place within the four walls of that apartment that was safe, secure, and ours. Unfortunately, the outside world was more hostile. Don't ask, don't tell had been in effect for nearly a decade. The terrorist attacks of September 11th occurred during that first year together, and we knew that deployments were in our future. Brent deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq, while I remained in DC. Sure, there were military spouses clubs to turn to for camaraderie and support, but you had to be an acceptable spouse, of which I was not, could not. I had two advantages being active duty. Go Navy. First, I had my own military obligations to keep me occupied, and I had access to military message traffic, reports that kept me apprised of his battalion's movements and engagements. And that's how I found out about the suicide bomber and saw his name on the list of the dead before his family had been notified. I didn't receive an official notification. They had lost their son. I had lost my partner, but only one of us could acknowledge the relationship and the loss. Don't ask, don't tell. At the funeral, I was allowed to sit with the family because I was friends with the family. And memories of that time are still a blur. But what I remember very vividly was that instead of allowing myself to grieve, I was more concerned that my actions, my words, my very presence at the funeral, any little thing would give me away. So back into the closet I went. And after the funeral, I just lost it. I withdrew. I was depressed and bitter. Some friends said I was just more depressed and bitter. A couple of drinks on the weekend became a couple of drinks every night. I didn't ask for help, certainly not from the military. Don't ask, don't tell. The pressure builds. You worry about being found out, losing your clearance, losing your job, your livelihood, so you keep it bottled up. You keep drinking, you keep withdrawing. And ironically, despite your best efforts, the things you fear will happen end up happening anyway. But better to be seen as a drunk than exposed as a queer. It's been 18 years since I lost Brent, and a day doesn't go by that I don't think about him and think about what might have been. Members of the military community are all too familiar with the saying, hurry up and wait. More than a decade after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there are roughly 79,000 LGBTQ plus individuals currently serving, along with an estimated 1 million veterans. We heard it on a regular basis from family, friends, fellow service members. People like Brent and me undermine unit cohesion. We erode good order and discipline. We're weak, girly, mentally unstable. We're not fit for military service. But we do serve. And it's these negative perceptions and stereotypes that keep so many of us in the closet. You learn how to play a role, acting butch, playing the pronoun game, even learning how to fool a lifestyle polygraph test. You learn how to be not you, and that takes its toll on a person both mentally and physically. What today's action means is that our nation is acknowledging all Americans, women and men, gay, straight, transgender, and non-binary people who have served, fought, died, and survived in the service of the country. That we and our struggles and sacrifices will no longer be invisible, but recognized and supported by the Department of Veteran Affairs. And for that, I thank you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McCaffrey. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. It is so powerful. Next, I would like to invite VA's White House liaison and U.S. Marine Corps veteran Jennifer Esparza up to the stage to read the poem Invisible Veteran. Invisible Veteran was written by Air Force veteran Lisa Carrington Furman as she was waiting for her appointment at the VA. A Latina retired Air Force colonel, Spanish speaker, writer, advocate, and Bronze Star decorated combat veteran, she looked around, wondering where were the veterans who looked like her? She wrote Invisible Veteran in less than half an hour. Lisa could not be with us today due to another commitment, but she gave us permission to read her words for today's ceremony. Mrs. Sparza.
Do you see me? You look beyond me and speak as if I'm not even here, but I'm standing right in front of you. Do you see me? You acknowledge the male veteran next to me with your gratitude and respect, but you ignore my service and sacrifice. Do you see me? You assume I'm someone's wife, daughter, sister, mother, or grandmother, but I served too. Do you see me? You revert to your default setting that only men are warriors, but I am a combat veteran who is also a woman. Do you see me? You downplay my contribution, unaware that women serve, but my sacrifice and valor were equal to or greater than some men. Do you see me? You forced me to work at gaining your respect, but haven't I already earned that? Do you see me? You still fail to identify or recognize me. I wonder if it's deliberate or ignorance. But my invisibility as a woman vet speaks volumes. Are you listening? Semper Fi.
Thank you, Mrs. Sparza. And Lisa, I hope today's program is a step in helping you and all those we serve to feel seen, welcome, and wanted at the VA. I'd like to welcome Chaplain Kimberly Willis up for the benediction.
This has been a beautiful ceremony, and I just want to say thank you for the gift of your stories today. They have touched my heart. Thank you so much. So since we've shouted out to most of the branches, let us aim high in our prayer today. Today marks the day when we collectively showed up to move away from implicit exclusion and chose to explicitly embrace inclusion. Of all those who bear the burden of this nation, military personnel and veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors, while we know there is yet much work to do, God, we are so grateful for your leading hand that continues to guide us to higher truths and realities. As we celebrate today and conclude this ceremony, we pray for the unity of our nation, the safety of our military, the security of our borders, comfort for our survivors, strength for our caregivers, return of our missing, equity for every inhabitant, and determination to continue to march toward what is right and what is just. Lord, we hope for the light of your glory to shine upon the generations to come, from sea to shining sea, and we ask, oh God, that you bless our elected and appointed leaders, endow them with wisdom and compassion. Let the words of the Department of Veteran Affairs mission statement reverberate in their hearts and minds in every decision relating to veterans, to fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for those who have served in our nation's military and for their families, caregivers, and survivors. Most importantly, Sovereign God, let this mission be the clarion call for all of us who have so greatly benefited from the freedom secured by every military member. Amen.
Please be seated. This concludes our event. However, I have two quick announcements. Immediately following this program, those who would like to be in a photo to commemorate today, we're all going to meet out front in the atrium for a group photograph. So if you could make your way there after this. Also, if you'd like to join us for a small reception in the lobby following the photograph. And after that, this beautiful museum is open until 5 p.m. I hope that you'll take some time to look at the wonderful tributes, art, and hear the stories of our sisters in arms. Thank you all for making the trek to join us today to celebrate VA's event, VA's mission to serve all who served, and for holding us to our promise to serve all who served. Thank you.